I'm Cassidy Morgan, 32, and I just heard my parents tell everyone at our family reunion that they wished my perfect sister Eliza was their only child. What they don't know is that I've discovered their decades-old secret, one that will turn our entire family dynamic upside down. By tonight, they'll regret those words more than anything they've ever said. Hey everyone, thanks for joining me today for this wild family drama. Before I dive deeper into how my parents' words shattered my world and what happened next, I'd love to know where you're watching from. Drop your location in the comments below. If you enjoy family revenge stories where karma comes full circle, hit that like button and subscribe to join our storytelling community. Now let me take you back to where it all began, when I still thought blood meant loyalty. Growing up in suburban Boston, I always felt like I was living in Eliza's shadow. 3 years my senior, she was everything. I wasn't naturally athletic, academically gifted, and socially adept. Our childhood home was a shrine to her accomplishments, shelves lined with her debate trophies, walls adorned with her honor roll certificates, and the refrigerator plastered with newspaper clippings about her tennis championships. Meanwhile, my average grades and passion for photography were treated as disappointments, merely tolerated rather than celebrated. "Why can't you be more like your sister?" became the unofficial family motto. My mother, Catherine, a successful corporate attorney, would sigh dramatically whenever I brought home a B+ instead of Eliza's consistent A's. My father, Richard, a cardiothoracic surgeon, barely acknowledged my existence unless it was to point out how I fell short compared to his precious firstborn. They funded Eliza's expensive summer programs at Harvard and Yale while I worked part-time jobs to save for a basic photography course at the local community college. The disparity in our treatment wasn't subtle. At family gatherings, relatives would fawn over Eliza's latest achievements: her full scholarship to Princeton, her prestigious internships, her perfect boyfriend from a well-connected family. I became accustomed to being introduced as Eliza's sister, my own identity reduced to an afterthought. During holiday dinners, my parents would proudly discuss Eliza's accomplishments while I sat silently, feeling increasingly invisible. What hurt the most wasn't just the preferential treatment, it was the emotional neglect. When Eliza won state championships, our parents took the entire family to celebrate at expensive restaurants. When I won a local photography contest during my junior year of high school, the one achievement I was truly proud of, my mother merely glanced at the certificate and said, "That's nice, but don't get distracted from your real studies." Despite everything, I never blamed Eliza. She was kind to me in private, often trying to include me in conversations at family events, or praising my photography when our parents wouldn't. Sometimes she'd whisper encouragements when no one was listening: "They just don't understand your talent, Cass." But even her kindness couldn't heal the wound of feeling fundamentally unwanted by my own parents. By the time I turned 18, I had developed thick emotional armor and a burning determination to create a life far away from my family's toxic dynamic. I chose to attend college in California, as far from Boston as I could reasonably get without leaving the country. My parents barely reacted to my departure aside from my father's passing comment, "At least we still have Eliza nearby." The distance provided some healing. In California, nobody knew me as Eliza's sister. I was just Cassidy, a photography major with a growing portfolio and genuine friends who appreciated my artistic eye. I began building a career in architectural photography, finding beauty in structures and spaces that others overlooked. The irony wasn't lost on me. Over the next decade, I limited my family interactions to brief holiday visits and obligatory phone calls on birthdays. I built a successful freelance photography business specializing in architectural and interior design photography for high-end magazines. My work took me around the world: Paris, Tokyo, Barcelona, capturing spaces that told stories through light and shadow. Meanwhile, Eliza followed our parents' prescribed path, attending medical school and eventually joining our father's practice. I thought I had made peace with my place in the family hierarchy. I convinced myself that I had moved beyond the need for parental approval. I told myself that my success was sweeter because I had achieved it entirely on my own, without the constant support and resources my sister had received. I believed I had accepted that my parents would never see me as enough. But deep down, a small part of me, that wounded inner child, still hoped that someday they would recognize my worth. That someday they would apologize for the years of comparison and neglect. That someday they would be proud of the woman I had become, despite not because of their parenting. I had no idea that everything would change during the annual Morgan family reunion this summer. I had no way of knowing that a chance discovery in my grandmother's attic would unearth a family secret so profound that it would redefine everything I thought I knew about my place in the family. And I certainly couldn't have predicted that after years of silent suffering I would finally find the perfect opportunity for the reckoning that had been long overdue. The annual Morgan family reunion was a tradition I dreaded but never skipped, mostly out of respect for my grandmother Eleanor, the family matriarch. This year's gathering was held at her sprawling Victorian home in Concord, Massachusetts, the same house where my father and his siblings had grown up. Despite my success and independence, I still felt that familiar knot in my stomach as I drove up the tree-lined driveway, preparing myself for the inevitable comparisons to Eliza. The first day passed predictably enough. Aunt Judith asked why I wasn't married yet. Uncle Robert questioned whether photography was still working out for me, as though my features in Architectural Digest were just a phase. Meanwhile, Eliza arrived with her surgeon husband and their perfect 5-year-old twins, immediately becoming the center of attention. My parents beamed with pride as she discussed her recent medical research publication, barely acknowledging my presence when I entered the room. On the second day, seeking refuge from the family dynamics, I volunteered to help Grandma Eleanor sort through some old boxes in her attic. At 85, she was still sharp as a tack, but admitted she could use some help organizing decades of family memorabilia before eventually selling the house. "You always had an eye for detail, Cassidy," she said kindly, as we ascended the narrow staircase to the attic. "Just like your grandfather." The attic was a time capsule, dust motes dancing in the slanted light from the dormer windows, the air heavy with the scent of old paper and cedar. We worked methodically through boxes of old photographs, school reports, and holiday cards, sorting them into piles for different family members. "This one has your father's name on it," Grandma said, pointing to a weathered leather trunk in the corner. "Would you mind starting on that while I take a little break? My arthritis is acting up." After she left, I knelt before the trunk, running my fingers over the embossed R.M. Richard Morgan. Inside were stacks of my father's college notebooks, medical school admission letters, and other memorabilia from his youth. I was about to close it when I noticed a false bottom that seemed slightly ajar. Curious, I carefully lifted it to reveal a hidden compartment. Inside lay a manila envelope yellowed with age marked "Confidential" in faded red ink. My heart raced as I opened it, telling myself it was probably just old financial documents or medical records. What I found instead was a series of letters between my parents dated over 3 decades ago, along with legal documents that made my blood run cold. The first letter, written in my mother's precise handwriting, contained phrases that leapt from the page. "The adoption agency requires complete confidentiality," and "better if Cassidy never knows she isn't biologically ours." My hands trembled as I read letter after letter, piecing together the truth. I wasn't my parents' biological daughter. I had been adopted as an infant, the child of my mother's college roommate who had died in childbirth. The father was unknown. The legal documents confirmed it: birth certificates, adoption papers, court records, all carefully hidden away in my father's old trunk. But the most devastating revelation came from a letter my mother had written just before my 5th birthday. "Sometimes I look at Cassidy and wonder if we made the right choice. She's nothing like us or Eliza. Perhaps we should have waited for a child who would better fit our family." The room seemed to spin around me. Suddenly, everything made sense: the constant comparisons, the emotional distance, the feeling of never quite belonging. I wasn't just the less favored child. I was the child they regretted adopting, an obligation they had taken on out of loyalty to my mother's dead friend. More letters revealed that my parents had planned to tell me about my adoption when I turned 18, but ultimately decided against it, fearing it would unnecessarily complicate family dynamics. There was even mention of a small trust fund set up by my biological mother's parents' grandparents I never knew existed, which my parents had apparently kept in reserve rather than telling me about it. I sat frozen among the scattered papers, decades of emotions crashing through me in waves. Anger, betrayal, grief, and strangely a sense of liberation. The puzzle pieces of my life were finally clicking into place, painful but clarifying. I carefully photographed every document with my phone, then returned everything exactly as I had found it. When Grandma Eleanor returned to check on me, I managed to smile and showed her some innocuous photos I had discovered of my father's college graduation. That evening, as the extended family gathered for the reunion dinner in Grandma's elegant dining room, I observed everyone through new eyes. My parents laughing with my sister, the perfect biological family unit, plus their adoptive addition, the perpetual outsider they had never fully embraced. I stayed quiet through most of the meal, processing my discovery and considering my next steps. Should I confront them immediately? Demand answers about my biological family? Use this information as leverage for some kind of emotional reparation? The possibilities swirled in my mind as dessert was served, and then it happened, the moment that crystallized my resolve and set in motion the events that would forever change our family dynamic. My father stood to make his traditional reunion toast, champagne flute raised high. To family, he began, smiling broadly. To the bonds of blood that connect us all. The irony was almost too much to bear. As conversations flowed around the table, the topic turned to Eliza's twins and their already apparent academic aptitude. "They've clearly inherited the Morgan intelligence," my mother said proudly. "The bloodline is strong." Uncle Robert, already 3 glasses into the expensive Bordeaux, turned to my parents with a mischievous grin. "If only all your offspring turned out so well, eh, Richard and Catherine?" In that moment the room seemed to go quiet, though perhaps that was just in my perception. What happened next burned itself permanently into my memory. My father laughed, actually laughed, and replied, "Sometimes we wish Eliza was our only child." My mother nodded in agreement, adding, "She certainly would have made our lives simpler." They didn't even lower their voices. They didn't even check if I was listening. In that moment I became completely invisible, or perhaps I had always been. As family members awkwardly chuckled or averted their eyes, a cold, clear purpose crystallized within me. They had hidden my truth, denied me knowledge of my biological heritage, withheld a trust fund that was rightfully mine, and now publicly wished I didn't exist. For 32 years I had sought their approval, their love, their acceptance. Now I wanted something else entirely: justice. And with the evidence hidden in my phone, I finally had the means to obtain it. The remainder of the family dinner passed in a blur. I excused myself early, claiming a migraine, and retreated to the guest room I was staying in. Alone at last, I spread my evidence across the bed, the photographed documents that proved my entire life had been built on lies. As I examined each piece of the puzzle, a plan began to form in my mind. This wouldn't be a hasty emotional confrontation. This would be calculated, methodical, and devastating. First, I needed more information. The adoption papers mentioned my biological mother, Alexandra Winters, who had been my mother's roommate at Wellesley College. There was no father listed on my original birth certificate. The documents also referenced grandparents Edward and Margaret Winters, who had established a trust fund for me. If they were still alive, they would be my only biological family, and they might not even know I existed. I opened my laptop and began searching. Within an hour I discovered that Edward Winters had passed away 15 years ago, but Margaret was still alive at 78, living in an upscale retirement community in Providence, Rhode Island, less than 2 hours from where I sat now. Further digging revealed she was a philanthropist who had established a scholarship foundation in her daughter's name at Wellesley. There were even photos of her at charity events, an elegant woman with familiar green eyes. My eyes. Next, I accessed the legal database I sometimes used for copyright research in my photography business. It took some creative searching, but I eventually located records of the trust fund established for Alexandra Winters' infant daughter. According to the documents, it had been a substantial amount even 30 years ago. With compound interest, it would now be worth considerably more. The trust administrators were listed as Richard and Catherine Morgan, my adoptive parents, who had been granted full discretionary control until the beneficiary, me, turned 30 or was informed of her adoption, whichever came first. I was now 32. For 2 years they had been legally obligated to transfer control of the trust to me. Instead, they had maintained their deception, and I strongly suspected continued to use the trust's income for their own purposes. My hands shook with rage as I made a timeline of their deception. I remembered how they had balked at helping me pay for college, while fully funding Eliza's education. I recalled working 3 jobs to afford my first professional camera while they took luxury vacations. All while sitting on a trust fund that was legally mine. The more I uncovered, the more my initial shock transformed into cold, calculated determination. This wasn't just about emotional neglect anymore. This was financial fraud and breach of fiduciary duty, but exposing them legally wouldn't be enough. After what I'd endured, after what they'd just said at dinner, I wanted them to feel the same public humiliation and rejection they had subjected me to my entire life. I needed allies. Grandma Eleanor had always shown me genuine affection, and I suspected she might not know about the adoption or the trust fund. Eliza, despite benefiting from our parents' favoritism, had always been kind to me. And then there was Margaret Winters, my biological grandmother, who had tried to provide for me from afar. Over the next several hours I crafted a 3-phase plan. Phase 1 would be information gathering and alliance building. I would meet Margaret Winters, privately confirm our relationship, and learn about my biological mother. I would discreetly consult with a trust attorney about the legalities of my parents' actions, and I would carefully sound out Grandma Eleanor and Eliza to determine if they had been complicit in the deception. Phase 2 would involve securing my financial and emotional future. I would legally claim my trust fund and learn everything I could about my biological heritage. I would establish a relationship with Margaret if she was receptive, and I would prepare documentation of my parents' decades of fraud and deception. Phase 3 would be the reckoning, carefully timed and executed for maximum impact. I wouldn't just confront them privately. I would expose them publicly in front of the entire extended family. I would force them to acknowledge not only their deception about my adoption but their misappropriation of my trust fund. And I would do it in a way that would permanently alter their carefully crafted image as upstanding, respected members of Boston society. As dawn broke over Grandma Eleanor's garden, I finalized my timeline. The family reunion would continue for 3 more days. That was enough time to initiate Phase 1 and parts of Phase 2. Phase 3, the public reckoning, would need to wait for the perfect moment, which I already had in mind: my parents' upcoming 40th anniversary celebration scheduled for the end of the month. They had been planning this lavish event for over a year, inviting everyone from family members to colleagues to social connections. It would be attended by over 200 guests, including the hospital board my father served on and the partners from my mother's law firm. It would be the perfect stage for their downfall. The next morning at breakfast I presented a mask of normalcy, even managing to smile when my mother commented that my photography hobby seemed to be keeping me busy. Little did she know that every condescending remark, every dismissive glance was now being mentally catalogued as fuel for what was to come. Actually, I said casually, I was thinking of extending my stay in Massachusetts for a couple of weeks. I have a potential client in Providence who wants to discuss photographing their property portfolio. My mother raised an eyebrow. Well, I suppose you could stay in the condo. We'll be using the main house for anniversary preparations. The condo was a 3-bedroom apartment they owned in Back Bay, but rarely used another asset potentially purchased or maintained with my trust fund money. That would be perfect, I replied already, planning how I would use their own property as my base of operations for dismantling their carefully constructed facade. As I sipped my coffee watching my family interact, a strange sense of calm settled over me. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel like I was seeking their approval or trying to earn their love. I was finally seeing them clearly, not as the parents who had never loved me enough, but as people who had committed a calculated decades-long fraud against a child they had chosen to bring into their home but never into their hearts. Is everything all right, Cassidy? You seem different today, Eliza asked quietly as we cleared breakfast dishes together. I gave her a genuine smile. Everything is fine. Actually, better than fine. I think I've finally figured some things out. That sounds promising, she replied, looking relieved. Anything you want to talk about? Soon, I promised. Very soon. And with that, I excused myself to make a phone call to a retirement community in Providence where a woman who shared my green eyes was about to receive an unexpected visitor. The Lakeside Gardens retirement community in Providence was far from the stereotypical nursing home. Set on 15 acres of manicured grounds with a picturesque lake at its center, it resembled an exclusive country club more than an elder care facility. As I parked my rental car in the visitor's lot, my heart pounded against my ribs. Somewhere inside this elegant complex was the only blood relative I knew of my biological grandmother, Margaret Winters. I had called ahead introducing myself simply as a photographer working on a project about influential women in New England philanthropy. Margaret's assistant had seemed delighted to schedule an interview, mentioning that Mrs. Winters enjoyed discussing the scholarship foundation she had established in her daughter's memory. Her daughter? My mother. The lobby was tastefully decorated with fresh flowers and original artwork. A concierge directed me to the residence wing, where Margaret kept a spacious apartment overlooking the lake. With each step down the sunlit corridor, I rehearsed my approach. I wouldn't reveal everything immediately. I needed to assess what she knew, how much my parents had told her about me, and whether she might be receptive to a relationship with her only grandchild. A white-haired woman in a wheelchair opened the door at my knock. Despite her obvious physical frailty, her posture was impeccable, and her eyes, the same unusual shade of green as mine, were sharp and alert. Miss Winters, I'm Cassidy Morgan. Thank you for agreeing to meet with me. Please come in, Miss Morgan. I've set tea in the sitting room. I don't receive many visitors these days, so this is quite a treat. The apartment was elegant but comfortable, filled with books and framed photographs. As she poured tea from a silver service, I glanced at the nearby photo display. My breath caught when I saw a young woman who could have been my twin, same heart-shaped face, same green eyes, same dimple when she smiled. That's my daughter, Alexandra, Margaret said, following my gaze. She passed away 32 years ago during childbirth. The Scholarship Foundation is her legacy. I'm very sorry for your loss, I said softly. She was beautiful. Yes, she was. Inside and out. Margaret handed me a delicate teacup. Now tell me about this photography project of yours. For 20 minutes I maintained my cover story asking about her philanthropy work while studying her features, my features. The curve of her jawline, the way her eyes crinkled when she smiled, the elegant hands that gesticulated as she spoke. It was like looking at my own future. Finally, when there was a natural pause in the conversation, I set down my teacup with trembling hands. Mrs. Winters, I need to tell you the truth about why I'm here. I took a deep breath. My name is Cassidy Morgan. I was born 32 years ago at Boston Memorial Hospital. My birth mother was Alexandra Winters. The teacup slipped from Margaret's fingers, clattering against the saucer. Her face drained of color. "That's not possible," she whispered. "Alexandra's baby died." "Catherine told us the baby died along with our daughter." Now it was my turn to be shocked. "They told you I died." Catherine Morgan was Alexandra's college roommate. When Alexandra went into premature labor with no father in the picture, Catherine was her emergency contact. After we received the call that both Alexandra and the baby had died, Catherine handled all the arrangements. We were too devastated to question anything. My mind reeled with this new information. My parents hadn't just hidden my adoption from me, they had told my biological grandparents that I had died. They had deliberately denied this woman the chance to know her only grandchild. "Mrs. Winters, call me Margaret, please." "Margaret," I said, my voice breaking. "I'm very much alive, and I only discovered 2 days ago that I was adopted." Margaret's eyes filled with tears as she wheeled herself closer, reaching out with trembling hands to touch my face. Those eyes. Alexandra's eyes. "How did you find me? How did you know?" I explained about the documents I'd discovered, showing her the photos on my phone. As she scrolled through them, her expression cycled through disbelief, grief, and finally a slow-building anger. "They lied to us. For 32 years they lied to us. Edward died believing his only grandchild was buried alongside our daughter." Her voice hardened. "And the trust fund, we established it as a contingency in case Alexandra's pregnancy resulted in a live birth. If the child survived, the funds would be held in trust. If not, the money would go to the Scholarship Foundation." Catherine assured us the baby had died but clearly requested the trust be established anyway. "Then she and Richard must have diverted the funds." "I believe they've been using it for their own purposes," I confirmed, "including paying for their biological daughter's education while refusing to help with mine." For the next hour, Margaret and I pieced together the full extent of my parents' deception. Alexandra had been unmarried and 6 months pregnant when she developed severe preeclampsia. She had named Catherine as her medical proxy, trusting her college friend to make decisions if she became incapacitated. When Alexandra died during the emergency C-section, Catherine and Richard, who was then a resident at the hospital, had somehow arranged to adopt me while telling the Winters family that I hadn't survived. "We would have raised you," Margaret said, grasping my hands tightly. "Edward and I would have given anything to raise Alexandra's child." "Did you ever see a death certificate for the baby?" I asked. "No. Catherine handled everything. She told us the baby had been buried in a private ceremony with Alexandra. We were in such shock we never questioned it." "And the trust fund? We established it through our attorney with provisions that it would go to Alexandra's child if alive, or to the foundation if the child had not survived." "Catherine must have found a way to become the trustee by proving the child you existed while simultaneously telling us you had died." The magnitude of the deception was staggering. This wasn't just emotional cruelty or financial fraud. This was something much darker, a calculated plan to separate a child from her biological family while profiting from the arrangement. "There's more," I said quietly, telling her about growing up as the less favored child, about the psychological impact of always being compared to their biological daughter, and finally about the devastating comment at the reunion dinner. By the time I finished, Margaret's face was set in a mask of determination that I recognized from my own mirror. "This ends now," she said firmly. "They don't deserve to call themselves your parents. They have stolen 32 years that should have been filled with love and family, your true family." She wheeled herself to a desk in the corner and returned with a leather-bound album. "This is your mother, Alexandra. And these," she said, turning pages to show a distinguished-looking couple, "are your grandparents. The Winters family has been in New England for 10 generations. You come from a long line of strong women, Cassidy. Alexandra would be so proud of the woman you've become despite everything." As I looked through the album, tears flowing freely, Margaret made a phone call. "Sarah, it's Margaret Winters. I need you to contact Gerald immediately." "Yes, the attorney. Tell him it's an emergency involving the Alexandra Winters Trust. He needs to come to Lakeside Gardens today. And Sarah, tell him to bring everything he has on the trust, including the provision for fraud investigation." Turning back to me, she reached for my hand again. "Now tell me about your plan. I assume you have one, given that you found me and haven't confronted Catherine and Richard yet." I nodded, outlining my three-phase strategy, including the public reckoning I envisioned at their anniversary celebration. Margaret listened intently, occasionally nodding. When I finished, she smiled a smile I now recognized as my own. "It's good, but with legal support and my resources, we can make it ironclad. They won't just be humiliated, they'll face legal consequences. And most importantly, you'll finally receive everything that should have been yours all along: your heritage, your trust fund, and the truth." The attorney arrived 2 hours later. By then, Margaret and I had formed a bond that transcended our brief acquaintance. It was as though some cellular memory recognized her as family, as home. Gerald Peterson, a sharp-eyed man in his 60s who had apparently been the Winters family attorney for decades, was initially skeptical until he saw the documents and noted my striking resemblance to Alexandra. "This is fraud on multiple levels," he confirmed after reviewing everything. "Identity fraud, financial fraud, and potential medical ethics violations given Dr. Morgan's involvement in concealing a birth while a resident. The statute of limitations may protect them from criminal charges, but civil litigation could be substantial. And the trust fund, that's straightforward. As the named beneficiary who has now turned 30, control should have transferred to you 2 years ago." "How much are we talking about?" I asked, almost afraid to hear the answer. Gerald consulted his notes. "The initial trust was established with $5 million in 1992. Assuming even conservative growth and accounting for any legitimate withdrawals for your direct benefit, which there should be documentation for, we're likely looking at between $15 and $20 million today." The room spun around me. $20 million. While I had worked multiple jobs to put myself through college. While I had lived in a cramped studio apartment eating ramen for dinner. While they had sent Eliza to Princeton and bought vacation homes. "I want it all," I said firmly. "Every penny they stole from me. And I want them exposed for what they did to me and to Margaret and Edward." "We'll need to move quickly," Gerald advised. "Once they realize, they might try to hide assets or create an alternative narrative." Margaret reached for my hand again. "Stay here tonight. We have a lot to plan, and I've waited 32 years to have dinner with my granddaughter." As we continued strategizing into the evening, I felt something shift inside me, a weight lifting that I hadn't even known I was carrying. I wasn't unwanted. I wasn't less than. I was Alexandra Winters' daughter and Margaret Winters' granddaughter. I belonged to a family that had wanted me, had provided for me, and had mourned me when they believed I was gone. And soon, very soon, Richard and Catherine Morgan would face the consequences of every lie they had told and every moment of love they had denied me. I checked my phone to find 3 missed calls from my mother, wondering why I hadn't returned to Grandma Eleanor's for dinner. With newfound confidence, I texted back, "Made plans in Providence. Don't wait up." For the first time in my life, I didn't care about their approval or their response. I was exactly where I belonged, with my real family. Hey everyone, I hope you're as invested in this journey as I am right now. The emotions I'm feeling discovering my true heritage are overwhelming. If you're enjoying this story of family secrets and long overdue justice, please hit that like button to let me know. Are you as shocked as I was learning about my biological family? Have you ever discovered something that completely changed how you saw your own family? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Now let me tell you what happened next, because this family drama was about to reach a whole new level. The next morning I awoke in the guest room of Margaret's apartment feeling more rested than I had in years, despite the emotional whirlwind of the previous day. For the first time in my life I felt truly seen and valued, not for what I could achieve or how I compared to someone else, but simply for who I was. Over breakfast on Margaret's sunlit balcony, we continued developing our strategy with Gerald's legal guidance. "The most urgent priority is securing the trust fund," Gerald explained. "I've already filed emergency motions to freeze the accounts and remove Richard and Catherine as trustees. Given the documentation, the court should act quickly." "What about criminal charges?" I asked, stirring my coffee. "They lied about my existence. They told my biological grandparents I was dead." Gerald's expression was grim. "That's more complicated. The statute of limitations has likely expired for some offenses. However, if they've been actively misappropriating trust funds within the last few years, particularly after you turned 30, that's ongoing fraud. And if they falsified any documentation regarding your birth or Alexandra's death, those could be serious charges." "I don't just want my money," I said firmly. "I want justice. I want them to face consequences for what they did to all of us." Margaret reached across the table to squeeze my hand. "And they will, Cassidy. But we need to be strategic. Legal proceedings take time. The public exposure you're planning for their anniversary celebration will deliver the immediate reckoning you deserve." After breakfast, I faced a difficult decision whether to return to the family reunion or stay with Margaret. Gerald advised maintaining normalcy to avoid alerting my parents prematurely, so I reluctantly prepared to drive back to Grandma Eleanor's house. Before leaving, Margaret gave me a small velvet box. "This was Alexandra's," she said softly. "She always wore it right up until the day she went to the hospital." Inside was a delicate silver locket. When I opened it, I found a tiny photograph of a young woman, my biological mother, smiling radiantly at the camera. "She would have loved you so much," Margaret whispered, helping me fasten the chain around my neck. "She was so excited to become a mother." With tears streaming down my face, I hugged my grandmother, my real grandmother, promising to return the next day with updates. The weight of the locket against my chest felt like a shield as I drove back to the reunion, a tangible reminder that I was no longer alone in the world. When I arrived at Grandma Eleanor's, the family was gathered in the garden for lunch. My mother immediately cornered me, her disapproval evident. "Where have you been?" "We were worried when you didn't come back for dinner." The concern in her voice rang hollow. They hadn't even texted until after 11 p.m. "I told you I had a potential client in Providence," I replied calmly. "The meeting ran long, so I stayed overnight." She studied me suspiciously. "You seem different today." I touched the locket at my throat. "Do I? I'm just focused on work." Throughout lunch, I observed the family dynamics with new eyes. Uncle Robert boasting about his son's law school acceptance. Aunt Judith comparing her daughter's wedding rings. My father holding court with stories of difficult surgeries he had performed. The constant hierarchies, the subtle competitions, it all seemed so transparent now. After lunch, I found Grandma Eleanor alone in her study organizing family photo albums. Now, in her mid-80s, she had always been the family historian, meticulously documenting every birth, graduation, and wedding. "Cassidy dear," she smiled warmly, "come help me with these photos from your father's residency days. My eyes aren't what they used to be." I sat beside her, flipping through images from the early 1992s, around the time I would have been born. One photo caught my attention, my father in his residence coat with a group of colleagues at Boston Memorial Hospital. "Grandma," I asked casually, "do you remember when my parents adopted me?" Her hands stilled on the album. After a long pause, she looked up with confusion in her rheumy eyes. "Adopted? What are you talking about, dear?" The surprise in her voice seemed genuine. "You weren't adopted. You were born while your father was completing his residency." I remember it clearly. Your mother had some complications, and you spent a week in the NICU. Your father was so worried he barely left the hospital. I stared at her, trying to process this new information. Either Grandma Eleanor was suffering from memory issues, or she had been kept in the dark about my adoption as well. "Do you have any photos of me as a newborn?" I asked carefully. She brightened. "Of course, there's an entire album." She reached for a leather-bound book labeled Cassidy First Year and opened it proudly. The first page showed my mother in a hospital bed holding a swaddled infant. My father stood beside them, beaming. They looked like any proud new parents, except that something felt off about the image. I studied it closely, noting the awkward positioning, the slightly different quality of the lighting around the baby compared to my parents. As I flipped through more photos, I recognized signs of photo manipulation, subtle inconsistencies that my trained photographer's eye could detect, though they might fool most people. Someone had carefully edited these images, inserting a generic baby into family photos. In some, the infant didn't even have visible features, being conveniently bundled or positioned away from the camera. "These are lovely," I managed to say. "Could I borrow this album? For a personal project I'm working on." "Of course, dear. Just return it before you leave." That evening I made a crucial decision. I needed to talk to Eliza. Despite being the unwitting beneficiary of our parents' favoritism, she had always shown me genuine kindness. If anyone in the immediate family might be an ally, it would be her. I found her alone on the back porch after dinner, watching her twins play in the twilight garden. "Eliza, do you have a minute? I need to ask you something important." She patted the seat beside her. "Of course. Is everything okay? You've seemed preoccupied during the reunion." Taking a deep breath, I showed her the locket. "Do you know who this is?" She examined the tiny photograph and shook her head. "No. Should I?" "This is my biological mother, Alexandra Winters. I recently discovered I was adopted." Eliza's eyes widened in genuine shock. "What? That's impossible. I remember when you were born. I was only 3, but I remember visiting you in the hospital with Grandma Eleanor." "Those memories could have been constructed," I suggested gently. "The photo album Grandma has of my first year, the images have been manipulated. I can show you the inconsistencies. It's obvious to a professional photographer." Her face paled as I detailed everything I had discovered: the hidden documents, my biological grandmother, Margaret, and the trust fund that had been kept from me. When I described our parents' devastating comment at the dinner table, tears filled her eyes. "I was there. I heard them say it. I've been wanting to apologize for not standing up for you, but I was so shocked." She shook her head in dismay. "But adoption, a hidden trust fund, that's criminal." "I know this is a lot to process," I said gently. "And I understand if you need time or if you don't want to get involved." Eliza squared her shoulders, suddenly reminiscent of our grandmother. "No. If what you're saying is true, and I have no reason to doubt you, then they've wronged you terribly. You're my sister, regardless of biology." She reached for my hand. "What do you need from me?" Relief flooded through me. Having Eliza as an ally would change everything. "For now, just discretion. I'm planning to confront them, but not yet. And if you happen to have access to any family documents or photographs from around the time of my birth, those might help build my case." She nodded thoughtfully. "Dad's home office. He keeps all the important family documents in a fireproof safe. I know the combination. He gave it to me in case of emergency." A determined look crossed her face. "I'll check it tomorrow when everyone's at the picnic. You create a distraction and I'll slip away." As we finalized our plan, I felt a bittersweet wave of gratitude. My sister, because that's what she would always be, was choosing justice over blind loyalty. "Thank you," I whispered as we hugged goodnight. "This means everything to me." "We're family," she replied simply. "That means having each other's backs always." The next day unfolded according to plan. while I engaged the family with an impromptu photography session in the garden, capturing group portraits that everyone seemed eager to participate in. Eliza quietly slipped away to our father's home office. The distraction worked perfectly. No one noticed her absence amid the flurry of poses and arrangements. An hour later, we reconvened in my bedroom where Eliza spread several documents across the bed. "I found these in Dad's safe," she said, her voice tight with anger. "Birth certificates, both your original one listing Alexandra Winters as your mother and a falsified one with our parents' names. Hospital records with evidence of alterations, and financial statements from the Alexandra Winters Trust showing regular withdrawals." I examined the documents, noting that the most recent trust statement showed a balance of nearly $22 million. The withdrawals told a damning story: private school tuition for Eliza, vacation home purchases, investments in my father's medical practice, all funded with money that should have been mine. "There's more," Eliza said grimly, handing me a thin folder labeled AW Contingency. Inside was a handwritten letter from my mother to my father dated just after my birth. "Richard, it's done. The Winters believe their grandchild died with Alexandra. The adoption is finalized under our names with no record of Alexandra as the birth mother. The trust will provide nicely for our future. No one ever needs to know, certainly not the child." My hands trembled as I set down the letter. They didn't just hide my adoption. They deliberately deceived my biological grandparents, telling them I had died. Eliza's face was ashen. "This is beyond anything I could have imagined. They're not the people I thought they were." "What do you think we should do?" I asked. She squared her shoulders. "Everything you planned plus more. They need to face consequences, legal and social, and you deserve every penny of that trust fund." With Eliza now firmly on my side, and the additional documentation strengthening my case, I spent the next 2 weeks meticulously preparing for the confrontation. Margaret, Gerald, and I worked with forensic accountants to track every penny from the trust. Eliza discreetly gathered more evidence from our parents' records, and I coordinated with the event planners for their anniversary celebration, ensuring everything would be in place for what I now thought of as the reckoning. The night before the anniversary party, I had dinner with Margaret at her apartment. We had grown remarkably close in the short time since our first meeting, discovering shared interests, similar mannerisms, and the same dry sense of humor. "Are you ready for tomorrow?" she asked, studying my face with concern. "As ready as I'll ever be," I replied. "Part of me still can't believe this is happening, that my entire life has been a lie." She reached across the table to take my hand. "Not your entire life, Cassidy. You've built a beautiful career, formed meaningful friendships, and become a remarkable woman, all on your own terms. That's real. That's yours." Her words steadied me, reminding me that while my past might have been built on deception, my future was mine to shape. The next evening, the anniversary celebration was in full swing when I arrived. The elegant ballroom of the Boston Harbor Hotel glittered with chandeliers and floral arrangements, while Boston's elite mingled in formal attire. My parents held court near the entrance, accepting congratulations on 40 years of what everyone believed was a perfect marriage. I had chosen my moment carefully, the time when my father would make his anniversary speech with all guests assembled and attentive. Eliza had ensured the event coordinator knew to give me the microphone after my father's toast. As I moved through the crowd, I spotted key players in position: Gerald and his legal team near the back ready with documentation, Margaret in her wheelchair by the side entrance, dignified and resolute, a representative from the state medical board discreetly alerted about potential ethics violations, and several journalists from Boston's most prominent newspapers, invited under the guise of covering the social event of the season. My father tapped his glass for attention at precisely 9:00 p.m. The crowd fell silent as he launched into a self-congratulatory speech about 40 wonderful years with his beloved Catherine, their successful careers, their perfect daughter Eliza, and her beautiful family. I noted that he barely mentioned me, a final slight that only strengthened my resolve. to 40 more years, he concluded, raising his champagne flute as applause erupted. The event coordinator smoothly passed him the microphone. And now a few words from Richard and Catherine's daughter Cassidy. Surprise flickered across my parents' faces as I took center stage. This hadn't been in their carefully planned schedule. "Thank you all for coming to celebrate my parents' anniversary," I began pleasantly. 40 years is indeed a remarkable milestone. I paused, making eye contact with key individuals around the room. Grandma Eleanor, now seated beside Margaret after a private introduction earlier that day. Eliza and her husband near the front. The hospital board members at their reserved table. Marriage vows typically include promises of honesty and fidelity, I continued. But what happens when a marriage and a family are built on lies? A murmur ran through the crowd. My mother's smile froze on her face. 32 years ago, a young woman named Alexandra Winters died, giving birth to a baby girl at Boston Memorial Hospital. That baby girl was me. The room went completely silent. My biological mother's trusted friend Catherine Morgan and her husband Richard, then a resident at the hospital, adopted that baby. But instead of providing the loving home, they promised they did something unforgivable. I held up the locket with Alexandra's photo. They told my biological grandparents that I had died alongside my mother. They erased my true identity. They hid a substantial trust fund that had been established for me, and they raised me as their less favored child, constantly compared to their biological daughter while secretly using my inheritance to fund their lavish lifestyle. My father stepped forward, his face contorted with rage. "This is absurd, Cassidy. You need help. What I need, Richard, is for you to explain these documents." I nodded to Gerald, who distributed packets to key guests, hospital administrators, law firm partners, family members. "You'll find birth certificates, both authentic and falsified, financial records showing misappropriation of trust funds, letters detailing the deliberate deception of the Winters family." As guests began examining the documents, horrified murmurs spread through the ballroom. My mother had gone deathly pale. "And perhaps you'd like to meet someone," I continued, gesturing toward the side entrance. "Margaret Winters, my biological grandmother, who spent 32 years believing I was dead because of your lies." Margaret wheeled forward, her dignity and resemblance to me unmistakable. A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. "The courts have already frozen the Alexandra Winters Trust," I announced. "Legal proceedings are underway to transfer control to its rightful beneficiary, me. And investigations into potential criminal charges for fraud, identity falsification, and medical ethics violations have been initiated." My father lunged toward me, but Eliza's husband, himself a respected surgeon, intercepted him. "Don't make this worse, Richard," he warned quietly. "Why?" I asked, addressing my parents directly for the first time. "Why did you do it? Why adopt a child you clearly didn't want? Why lie to everyone?" My mother finally found her voice. "The money," she said flatly. "It was always about the money. The trust was substantial, but we could only access it as your guardians." The baldness of her admissions stunned the room. "And at the family reunion," I pressed, "when you said you wished Eliza was your only child, did you mean that?" She met my gaze without flinching. "You were never the daughter we wanted. You were an investment." The cruelty of her words hung in the air. But instead of crushing me as they once would have, they simply confirmed what I already knew. "Well, the investment period is over," I declared, "and the returns belong to me." I turned to address the stunned crowd. "I apologize for disrupting this celebration. But after 32 years of living a lie, I believe the truth deserves its moment." As I stepped away from the microphone, chaos erupted. Hospital board members huddled in urgent discussion. Law firm partners pulled my mother aside with furious expressions. Family members approached me with shocked support or angry denial, depending on their loyalties. Through it all, I felt a strange sense of peace. The reckoning I had planned had unfolded even more effectively than I had hoped. Not only had I reclaimed my identity and my inheritance, but I had also exposed the truth to everyone who mattered in my parents' carefully constructed social world. Their reputation, which they had always valued above all else, lay in tatters. Eliza found me by the balcony doors where I had stepped out for a moment of quiet. "Are you okay?" she asked gently. "I think I am," I replied, surprised to find it was true. "It's over. The truth is out." She hugged me fiercely. "I'm so sorry for everything they did to you. For all the times I benefited from their favoritism without recognizing what was happening." "You have nothing to apologize for," I assured her. "You were a child too, and you've been my only real ally in that family." As we looked back into the ballroom, we saw our father being confronted by his hospital colleagues while our mother sat alone at a table abandoned by her society friends. Their perfect world had collapsed in the span of 15 minutes. "What happens now?" Eliza asked. I touched Alexandra's locket at my throat. "Now I build a new life, one based on truth. I get to know my biological grandmother and learn about the mother I never knew. And I use the trust fund the way it was intended to create the future Alexandra would have wanted for me." Margaret joined us on the balcony, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "Alexandra would be so proud of you," she said, taking my hand. "Not just for tonight, but for the strong, principled woman you've become despite everything." As the three of us stood together, the sister who had chosen loyalty over blood, the grandmother who had been denied decades with her only grandchild, and me, finally free from the burden of seeking approval from people who had never truly wanted me, I felt something unexpected: gratitude. Gratitude for the truth, however painful. Gratitude for the family I had found and the one that had found me. And gratitude for the future that now stretched before me, unburdened by the weight of secrets and lies. It's been 6 months since the night I exposed the truth at my parents' anniversary celebration. The fallout was swift and comprehensive. My father resigned from the hospital board under pressure after an ethics investigation was opened. My mother's law firm placed her on indefinite leave pending the outcome of financial fraud charges. The scandal dominated Boston social circles for weeks, with former friends and colleagues distancing themselves from the disgraced couple. But this story isn't about their downfall, it's about my rise. The courts quickly ruled in my favor, transferring control of the Alexandra Winters Trust to me as the rightful beneficiary. The final amount, including interest and penalties for misappropriated funds, came to just over $24 million. I've established a photography scholarship in my biological mother's name at Wellesley College and funded a maternal health initiative at Boston Memorial Hospital to help women facing high-risk pregnancies like Alexandra's. Margaret and I have become inseparable. I've moved to Providence to be near her, purchasing a home just minutes from her retirement community. Every Sunday we have dinner together and add to the memory book we're creating about Alexandra, filling in the gaps in my knowledge about the remarkable woman who gave me life. I've even discovered that my passion for photography may be inherited. Alexandra apparently always carried a camera to document the world around her. Eliza and I remain close, our bond stronger than ever. She stood firmly by my side throughout the legal proceedings, providing key testimony about our parents' treatment of me and their financial manipulations. Her unwavering support cost her relationships with our parents, but as she told me, I choose the sister who shows integrity over the parents who showed none. As for Richard and Catherine, I've had no contact with them since that night. I've heard they've moved to Florida, away from the scandal and disgrace that now surrounds their names in Boston. Sometimes I wonder if they ever truly regret what they did, or if they only regret being caught. Either way, I no longer seek their approval or mourn their love. The most unexpected outcome of this journey has been my newfound sense of belonging. For 32 years I felt like an outsider in my own family, never quite good enough, never truly fitting in. Now I understand why I was trying to belong in a place where I was never meant to be. With Margaret I've found my true heritage. With Eliza I've preserved the one genuine family bond worth keeping. And within myself, I've discovered a strength I never knew I possessed. So, if you've ever felt like you didn't belong, like you were living a life that didn't quite fit, trust that inner voice. Sometimes the most painful truths lead to the most liberating outcomes. And remember that family isn't always defined by blood or legal documents, it's defined by love, respect, and mutual support. Thank you for taking this journey with me. If my story resonated with you in any way, I'd love to hear about your own experiences with family secrets or unexpected discoveries in the comments below. And if you found value in this story of family karma and long overdue justice, please hit that like button, subscribe to my channel for more real-life stories, and share this video with someone who might need to hear that the truth, however difficult, is always worth pursuing. I'm grateful for each and every one of you, and I hope the lessons from my family revenge story might help you navigate your own path to authenticity and belonging.